All righty. All right. Well, thanks for joining tonight. I know it was kind of a last minute reschedule, and I apologize for having to cancel the one at the first Monday of April. I had a little health issue come up that needed my attention. But all is improving. So, what I'm going to do tonight is once I started working into the brush-footed butterflies, I realized there were so many species, somewhere around I don't know, between 35 and 40 species. I felt like it was too many to cover in one night. So, especially in the evening. So, and since we want to try to keep this to an hour or so, I decided to break that up. So the next one, which will be the first Monday evening in May, will be the second part of the brush-footed butterflies, and then the last one, which will move to June, the first Monday night in June, that's when we'll tackle the skippers, and that ought to be an interesting one too. And then wrap up this series of optional trainings for you. So hopefully you're enjoying it. The recordings are out there for everybody to watch and kind of get up to speed. Now, hopefully this rain will really spark some butterfly emergence and involvement. So it should get better and better. Um, so we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. Let's see here if I can push the right button. So we're going to be talking tonight about part of the Nymphalidae family, or the brushfoot butterflies. These are a wide variety of butterflies in different shapes and sizes and colors. The one characteristic that kind of unifies all of the nymphalids are that their two front legs are much reduced to the point where if you don't look really closely, you might not even see them. So a lot of those brushfoots looks like they look like when they're on a flower, they only have four legs. But the other two are reduced, they're very hairy. That's the name brushfoots. And I use the book that I rely on mostly when I'm out doing butterflies is the Kaufman Field Guide to Butterflies in North America. And so he's kind of divided that into these four groups of subfamilies with the typical brushfoots. There's several subfamilies in there. So I'm kind of breaking it down into these four. Tonight, we're going to cover the longwings and fritillaries that we might have here, the crescents and checker spots, which is where we'll spend most of our time because they're small and they are easily confused. So I really want to dig deep into those to kind of help you start to look for things that can help you separate those. And a lot of times, at least at Guadalupe, they all come out kind of at the same time in the spring. And then we'll look at some of the typical brushfoots, and then we'll finish up the brushfoots the next time, along with the satyrs, of which are several species we might have from around here. Just as a reminder, most of this is we do a lot of surveys at Guadalupe, so I'm focused on Guadalupe, but a lot of this will apply to where you're doing butterflies in Bexar County and in Comal County and in Kendall County and surrounding areas. And obviously, the farther south you get, the more diversity you're going to get too. So have to keep that in mind. So many of these butterflies rest with their wings open, so you can identify them from above, except of course when they don't. And in some of them, sometimes the characteristics of the wings on the underside are actually as distinctive, if not more distinctive, to separate species than the top side. And then, but as I say that, of course, you can get characteristics or markers on both the upper surface and the lower surface to help you with that identification. We're going to start with Heliconia. Heliconia. I hate that nay thing. We're going to start with the longwings and fritillaries. How's that? Orange is the dominant color of most of the species in the subfamily, and I mean bright orange. Not always, but mostly. Of the 33 species of fritillaries in North America, we are only represented by two here in Texas. A lot of the fritillaries in North America are actually out in the Rocky Mountains area and up into Canada and then up in the northern United States to the east as well. They typically perch with their wings open, but with many species, particularly the fritillaries, the best field marks are on the ventral surface, as I mentioned just a minute ago. Passion vines are kind of a shared larval food source for a lot of these butterflies, at least the ones we have here in Texas, I should say. Fritillaries may fly year-round, particularly the variegated fritillary. I will say the variegated in the Gulf are two most common things that we're going to be talking about. And then some of the other brushfoots also in the wintertime can be sometimes almost at half size from those in the summertime. And that may very well be a food availability and food quality limitation that they have there that causes them to be much smaller in the winter months when they are out and about. We'll start with the Gulf fritillary. This is just a striking butterfly. This should be a pretty easy one for you to identify. Fairly common. It has kind of long wings, long narrow forewings. Um, Amazingly enough, some people that are new to butterflies will think this might be a monarch because they think monarchs of orange and black, and certainly this has orange and black, but it really doesn't look anything like a monarch. But the males are and females are different. The males are a little bit brighter orange, and they don't the lines, the vein lines on the female, on the forewing especially, are a little bit thicker. So you can actually tell the difference between the male and the female with a close look if you get a good look. On the underside, so they have that mostly orange, bright orange. They've got a couple of little white dots up here in the cell that you have right here. And then on the underside is where they're also equally striking with the kind of silvery white spots on the underside of the hind wing, the orange and black streaking or spotting or striping on the thorax is really striking as well. This is, I think, of all of our butterflies. To me, in some ways, this is the prettiest butterfly we have. It's about a 2.4 to 3 inch type long wingspan on this butterfly. So I would call it a medium sized to small, large butterfly. When it flies, it's fairly distinctive, got a kind of a shallow wing beat. And I always describe the wings a little bit like they're quivering. So shallow wing beat. They don't fly super fast. So it seems like they're checking out their environment all the time. And they will feed with wings both closed and open, as you see here in these photographs. So that's the Gulf fritillary, very, very common throughout our entire area. Its relative that we have in terms of fritillaries is the variegated fritillary. And it is another strikingly patterned butterfly, but it doesn't have the deep, bright orange that you see on the Gulf fritillary. So it's a little easier to tell. More muted oranges with some yellowish orange and then some browns and some black spotting there that you see there. It's anywhere from 1.5 to 2.6 inches long, so a little bit smaller. The wings aren't quite as elongated as you saw on the Gulf fritillary. This is a butterfly we're going to see most of the year. And oftentimes when this one is out foraging, it's pretty easy to identify because of this pattern. You have all of this row of yellow dots surrounded by black. You've got these yellow or black centered submarginal bands there. So it's fairly distinctive butterfly, darker orange towards the body, as you see there. This is probably an unusual pose for this butterfly. Unlike the Gulf, which I see with its wings folded a lot, I don't see that as much with the variegated fritillary, but a fairly distinctive pattern here, certainly different than the Gulf fritillary. It is a flyer. It is a good, strong flyer, but it flies generally low to the ground, visiting a lot of different kinds of flowers, seemingly laying eggs everywhere. This is a butterfly, even though it lays its eggs, or the caterpillars feed on passion vines. I've watched them lay their eggs not on the vine, but near the vine. So it's not always going to be laid right where it on the actual host plant. They also will lay their eggs on violets and other plants, so they're a little bit more generalized in terms of their host plant requirements. Again, this is one of the more common butterflies we have, and as I said, it's possible especially in a mild winter to see this butterfly flying 12 months a year. The next butterfly before we move on to the next butterfly, I did want to throw this one up. I've got a variegated fritillary with the wings closed here, and I've got the common buckeye, which we'll also talk about at the end of the evening. But the reason I wanted to show you this is when their wings are full, when their wings are open, you can't mistake a common buckeye. But when the wings are folded and you don't see any of the giant eye spots, now here you can see a couple of small eye spots here, but those wings, I mean, if you weren't really looking carefully and for whatever reason the wings didn't open, it wouldn't be impossible to kind of have to do a double take to make sure that you've got the common buckeye and the variegated. So I put these up here just so you can see this has more underside, has more of a brown, plain brown background. And of course, buckeyes mostly are on the ground when we see them when we're out doing our surveys. Um, Wings folded is not real common, but it does happen once in a while. So I put this here just so you can see this very brown background, and it actually blends in very well with the soil underneath it. This one now is in some sunlight, but notice it's a much more variable pattern here, and it lacks any sign of those eye spots that these guys have. Now, if this forewing is pushed up a little bit, there's one really big eye spot right here, just on the other side of this these cream colored cells you see here. That eye spot would be right here, and it'd be very obvious. But again, with the wings folded, it's worth taking a look and doing a second look just to make sure you're properly identifying the butterflies. So that's why I showed you. Now I am gonna show you two long wings that are mostly going to be down in the Rio Grande Valley, but we have seen both of these next two species at Guadalupe on very rare occasions, and one of them, the Julia, this Julia, I actually took this picture in my front yard here in Bernie, so it's not impossible to get this butterfly.
Hey, Craig, before we move on, Darlene has a question about the
Sure.
variegated. So she's captured the Mexican frit several times. What do you look for as differences to variegated?
Oh, so man, oh man, oh man. There are some distinct differences. The biggest one, let's see if I can go back here. Um, hang on. Let's see if I can describe. I have pictures of it, but I didn't put it in this presentation because I really wasn't um considering that one. And I guess I should have known Darlene would get a picture of it. So I thought about putting it in, but of course I didn't. Hang on, just give me a second here. I want to make sure I describe it correctly and not throw something out there. So the Mexican fritillary, this whole area of the hind wing on here, you notice a distinct pattern here on the when the wings are open. This whole area is completely pale yellow. It still has these dots here, but all of this is just a pale yellow wash
Hey,
on
Craig,
this.
we're actually not seeing your mouse.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. That's right. Because I'm looking at the wrong screen.
Oh,
I've got
there
two
you are.
screens up.
Now we do.
Thank you
We're
for
good.
pointing that out. I do that a
Sure.
lot. This area right here on the hind wing of the Mexican fritillary is pale orange. So it's this color, and the entire area is that color without the distinct dark lines. So you won't see these vein lines, these dark vein lines on the Mexican fritillary. Um, so that's probably the biggest thing. When I was down in the valley this winter, that's what we looked for to see the Mexican fritillary with when the wings were open. We were looking for this entire area above this line here to be very pale orange. And I apologize for not putting it in the presentation. The other thing, I'm trying to see if there's anything else different. That's probably the easiest way to separate them. So if you see a fritillary that is pale orange here with no lines, no other distinguishing marks on both these parts of the hind wing, you might have a Mexican fritillary. So yeah, and I do know the Mexican fritillary has been seen in the San Antonio area before. So apologize for not including that in here with this presentation. What I will do for you though is I'll put some pictures in the next one, and so we can review that and revisit that. So I'll make sure that we do that so that those images are available to us. All right, Julia heliconian, big, long, skinny butterfly. It goes anywhere from 3.25 inches all the way up, almost up to 4 inches for a wingspan. Bright orange, very narrow wings, a fluttery flight, very fluttery flight. Males and females are slightly different. They can appear here, but by and large, they're going to be in the valley. And when we typically get them, and I'm not saying always, by the way, these have been seen as far north as Dallas Fort Worth, based on iNaturalist records. And the one record of a photograph that was taken at Guadalupe was by Trent Reed, one of the rangers there at the park. Um, these guys are typically going to be seen later in the summer into the fall. When we get into fall and late fall here in this part of Texas, we seem to get a little bit of immigration in from those border butterflies, and all of a sudden some odd butterflies will drift up here from the valley all the way up into San Antonio and even farther points farther north. So it's not impossible to see this, but it's going to be distinctly longer winged than the variegated frit, just so you know. And the underside of this butterfly does not have all of those silver spots that the Gulf frit has either. So the other one that is possible, we actually had a survey years ago, and one fluttered over our heads up at Topwell. We never got a photograph because it never landed, but that would be the zebra heliconian. Again, a long-winged butterfly, up to 4 inches of wingspan. This one doesn't have much yellow on it. It's actually or orange on it. It's mostly yellow, whitish yellow stripes on a black background. Very dramatic looking butterfly. November, December down in the valley is can be quite common. But it is very, very unmistakable. I'm guessing they show up in San Antonio from time to time, but not going to be a common one. But I wanted to put that in there because for those of you that do surveys down in San Antonio, that is a butterfly that might show up for you once in a while. So it's worth just kind of having it in the back of your head to know that it's possible. All right, so now we're going to really get into the weeds here. We're going to talk about the crescents, checker spots, and patches, of which there's quite a few species. And I want to cover these in good detail because there are a lot of similarities between some of the species. These are small butterflies, anywhere from 7/8 of an inch, so not even an inch long, to up to 2 inches. And 2 inches would be an exceptional specimen. Most of them are probably not more than an inch and a half to an inch and 3/4. Orange is a dominant color on all of these. They all have fairly complicated patterns. And as a result of those complicated patterns, there's a lot of overlap. Those orange spots are often outlined in dark brown or black. So those are the kind of the color schemes there. They typically feed with their wings open, held flat. The underwings, though, often can actually help you provide identification tips. So it's worth waiting to see if they close their wings, or if you can get a photograph of the underwing too to help you with verifying which species you're looking at. The other thing about these guys, they will often all come out, kind of emerge in the same time frame, in the same 1 or 2 month period, and thus that adds to the confusion for identification. Most of these are going to overwinter as larvae. And for us, at least in my experience doing surveys at Guadalupe for the last 13 years or whatever it's been, 13, 14 years, we see the greatest diversity in the springtime and the greatest numbers in the spring. And then throughout the rest of the summer and fall, they kind of come and go in smaller numbers, except for one species that we'll talk about that everybody, I'm sure, is guessing already. These are mostly low-flying butterflies. I mean, they're flying close to the ground. A lot of them are feeding on low-growing members of sunflower family. Frog fruit is a very popular nectar source for these butterflies. So if you have patches of frog fruit, it's always good to survey those patches for them and for a variety of the skippers that are out there as well. Now, I'm going to introduce this page. This is on page 8 of Kaufman's Field Guide Butterflies in North America. I'm going to be talking about some of these different areas on the forewing and the hindwing, these banded areas. So we have the ones I'm mostly going to talk about are going to be the marginal, submarginal, and post-median bands of both the hindwing and the forewing, and then sometimes we'll reference a few on the underside. But they're just the different bands going through here. It's worth, if you've not done this before with these guys, it's worth looking at this page. You know, a lot of times we get these field guides and we never read the introductory material. this can actually be very, very helpful in terms of as you read descriptions in the field guides, in particular, knowing where the median or the post median or the submarginal or the marginal band happens to be on these butterflies. And you'll notice that it can be very different. So a monarch is not gonna, it's not gonna be quite as obvious as it's gonna be on a checker spot or a crescent. And we're gonna be focusing on wings that look a lot like that, like this one right here. So that's what we're going to be focused on. So I just to kind of go through it, the fringe is the outer edge, the very outer edge of both the hind and the forewing. And then the next band in, which is a lot of times is black, it's right here. That's the marginal band. So you've got the fringe, then you've got the marginal band. Then you have the submarginal band, which is this little set of cells here. Then you have the post median band and the median band. We're not going to talk a whole lot about post basal or basal bands. We don't need to talk too much about that. So it starts with the fringe, then marginal, submarginal, post median, and median. I wish they'd just go, sub median instead of post median. It's kind of weird the way they do it. This right here on most of these, on our butterflies, there's a cell here, and there's also something called a cell right here. Obviously, this is the forewing and the hind wing you see right here. And on the underside, it's very similar in terms of here you can see the marginal band a little better, that orange band right there. Submarginal is that white band you see there. The post median is that orange band there, and then the median band is this big wide, typically fairly wide band that you see here on the hind wing as well. So something to just kind of keep in the back of your mind. I'm going to be throwing these terms around, so I want you to be aware of them. Now, here's what I want you to do on a piece of scratch paper or something. These are 6 butterflies that we're going to be examining among the, I think, maybe 9 or 10 species that look the most alike. So what I'd like you to do is write the numbers down of these. And right now, well, no, it's probably not fair to do it right now because we've got all different skill levels. Just write down the numbers. I'm going to show you this again at the end of this part of the presentation and then put the names of these butterflies on there. So as we go through, watch for each of these and then fill in the blanks on your sheet of paper as we come across them. I am using the same photos, so you're not cheating you too hard, making it too hard on you. But keep an eye on those and then write down what you think these are as we go through the presentation. So 1 through 6, and once you have that, let's get started with the first one. We're going to start with the little tiny, and these again are very small butterflies. Most of them are under 2 inches long. So the one I want to talk about, if the farther north you go and the farther east you go, the pearl crescent becomes probably the most common of our crescents in eastern North America. Here in this part of Texas, we see them regularly, but they're not as common as a few of the other ones. It seems to me, at least at the park. So we will see a few of these each year, but never in big numbers as you do farther north. But the pearl crescent is really I'm going to say this 1,000 times, a beautiful little butterfly. But as you'll notice with all of the other pictures on the previous page, orange and black are the dominant color patterns here. And so it's fine tuning differences when you go to identify them when the wings are open. When the wings are closed, it's actually fairly easy to identify the pearl crescent because of this hind wing being that kind of pale yellowish cream color. Maybe that's the pearl color. I don't know. I've never seen real pearls, so I thought pearls were white. But anyway, this has these beautiful pale pattern here that, as you will see when we get to comparing all of the other ones, none of the other ones look like this. So that striking pattern right there, you might think that little white crescent right there is significant, and it can be. But as we go through, you're going to see that others have that white crescent there as well. In terms of when the wings are open, which is most of the time we see them, you'll notice that this band right here, which is the submarginal band, has yellow or has orange cells with large black spots that go all the way along the entire margin. You'll also notice that they actually extend, those black spots extend into the first 2 cells of the submarginal band on the forewing. And that's important right there because on the other ones, you're not going to see that. There's going to be very little evidence of that. The other thing I wanted to point out to you, just so that you know about it, get it in your head, is this band right here, the marginal band. You'll notice there's these three distinctive kind of crescent, yellowish crescents. You'll note that they don't go all the way up the edge of the hind wing, and they certainly don't extend into the forewing. And that'll be a clue when you see a couple of the other ones. You'll all of a sudden notice how strikingly different they are. The other thing to notice here is that none of these black spots have any kind of a clear circle in the middle. So they're solid black all the way up and down the wings. The other thing to note is that the tips of the forewing on the pearl crescent are mostly black. There's some orange right there, but they have a lot more black here than most of the other crescents and checker spots that we have. And notice I said the word most. But that generally can be a fairly distinctive pattern when you see this guy. Second one we're going to look at is the Vesta crescent, about the same size. Notice the color pattern is pretty similar. When we look at this one, the things that we're looking for here is on the hind wing, instead of that kind of beautiful pale color, yellow color or cream color, this one has just some blotches of brown and kind of whitish gray. So nothing really stands out here, and that may be the best thing to tell you that this is a Vesta crescent if the wings are folded. I will tell you about 95% of the time the wings are open. So it takes an effort to get this picture, and I say that from experience. The other thing that is pointed out in the field guides is this band right here has these orange cells that are surrounded by black on both top and the bottom. So something to keep in mind. But again, most of the time you're going to see the butterfly like this one, this image over here on the right with the wings open. All right. First thing I want you to notice is you've got this this band right here. It's a hang on. I just want to make sure I'm not screwing up my language. Where did I put it? Yeah, the post median band right here on the forewing is mostly orange, and that's going to be important when we look at the next butterfly. But it has that band. You can see there's a hint of a little bit of yellowish white right there, but mostly orange and not as distinctive as you're going to see on the Phaon crescent. Next thing to notice is that where the pearl crescent had black spots in these cells right here, these lack the black spots, and these are more crescent shaped instead of round or rectangular. And then the last thing is this one also has the black dots that do not have any clear spots in the center of those black dots in those cells. And then the marginal band, notice that they have these yellowish orange crescents that extend all the way up here and all, whoops, I'm sorry, let me go back. They extend all the way from the forewing, the leading edge of the hind wing, all the way to the trailing edge of, or the inside of the hind wing on both wings. So much more obvious when we do the comparisons, you'll start to notice the difference. So this butterfly is kind of identified by its very sort of distinctive but not distinctive pattern. There's nothing here that's really standing out to help you identify this. But that said, these black spots are important, and these crescents are very important in identification as well. Then we're going to go to the Phaon crescent. I want to focus right here on the Phaon crescent. Unlike the Vesta that we just looked at, the Phaon crescent has a band here that is white. It is distinctively differently colored than the rest of the orange you see on the wing. The Vesta, again, can have a little bit of that, but it's not that distinct. This one looks like it's wearing white epaulets. When I see this one, it reminds me of the male red-winged blackbird for some reason. Don't ask me why, but it does. So it's something to keep in mind. This is very distinctive. And again, another small butterfly. The other thing, I didn't highlight these, but you'll notice this has white crescents instead of yellow crescents here. Still has the black spots in the orange cells. No light color inside the black spots. And then when we go to the hind wing, which I don't see that often, um, kind of an interesting wing pattern. You'll notice and this happens with some of these butterflies, you get a summer form and a winter form. In the winter form, the hind wing is kind of drab. It looks a little bit more um, like the previous butterfly. It doesn't have a lot of distinct pattern there that's obvious. But in the summertime, it's very distinctly bright yellow with some black highlights throughout that hind wing. But on the forewing, you'll notice there's a lot of consistency of pattern there. With you've got the yellow bar here, you've got the orange here, you've got orange in here. Same thing is happening here, here, and here. So there, that contrast of the forewing with the hind wing when the wings are folded is actually kind of helpful in terms of identification of this particular butterfly. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to see this butterfly floating around close to frog fruit, which is its host plant. And you're going to see it close to that and sometimes in big numbers. And it will be the predominant crescent that we have generally, certainly at Guadalupe River State Park and probably around the entire area. Then we have the smallest of our little orange butterflies. This is the elata, and instead of a crescent, it's called the checker spot. The one thing about this one that I like, and by the way, it hangs around hairy tube tongue. If you don't know that flower, get to know it's a little purple, beautiful purple flower. And there's a lot of it at Guadalupe in certain areas, and this is the host plant, primary host plant for this butterfly. The thing I want to point out here is unlike those other patterns of those little orange and black butterflies we just saw, this is a really striking pattern worth looking at and noticing. There's one other checker spot that has a pattern in our area that has a pattern like this, but it's significantly larger, and we will compare those two in just a little bit. But that's a really striking pattern of white, orange, and black. Uh, just a beautiful underside. You look at this, which is fairly plain, and then it folds its wings, and it's pretty stunning how different they are. This one, when you look at the wings, when the wings are open, there's a couple of things. First of all, you have all of these orange cells here. None of them have black spots in them. So that's the key thing. First of all, tiny, smaller than the others. This is maybe not even an inch long and inch wide wingspan. No black spots there, so you really can't confuse this with any of the others. And it's generally just evenly patterned throughout this whole thing, a little bit like the Vesta crescent, but the Vesta is significantly bigger. And again, here you can kind of see there's in this cell right or this band right here, there's a little bit of yellow mixed with orange, but again, not so sharply contrasting that you should not be able to confuse this with the Phaeum. And then we have the silvery checker spot. This is our biggest one. This one can get inch and a half, inch and 3/4. Beautiful butterfly. It nectars on, or I mean, it hosts plants or include black-eyed Susan and other composites. The thing to notice about this butterfly, when you see it flying around and it lands, whether it's on the underside of the wing or the top side on the dorsal surface, those black spots have a yellowish white spot in the center of the black spots. That separates the silvery checker spot from all of the others. So keep that in mind as you're looking at those at this particular one. Now it does have a lot of black out here, similar to what the pearl, and we'll compare those. But again, this is the central distinguishing characteristic of the silvery checker spot from the other ones that other crescents and checker spots that we have in this particular part of the state. The other thing I like to notice when the wings are folded, I always look at this right here. It almost looks like either little gravestone markers, old-fashioned gravestone markers, or little short fingers. Very distinct pattern right there that none of the other butterflies show that distinctive of a pattern on the underside. So I'll look for that. But I'm really, if we boil it down, I'm looking to see, do these spots have white center, white or silvery or yellowish centers? And if they do, you know what you got. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through these and make comparisons. So this is going to take a little time, and we're going to run over 8 o'clock. So I apologize. So if you have to go, you have to go. It's being recorded. So hopefully that'll, you can watch the rest of it later. And I apologize in advance. there's a lot going on here. So let's take a look at the pearl. We're going to compare the pearl crescent to the other four right now, and then we're going to do the Vesta, and we'll work our way down until we get down to the end. So the pearl crescent versus the Vesta crescent, when we're comparing these two, if you just start to look at them, there's a couple of things to notice. First of all, notice how much more black is in the forewing tip on the pearl crescent versus the Vesta crescent. Just a more solid black. There's black up here, but this is a more solid black with less patterning, as you see on the Vesta. The next thing to notice are these crescents on the marginal band, or submarginal band. Here's this, again, these crescents that go all the way along the hind wing, all the way into the forewing. These basically, there are three in this particular example. They're not very extensive up through here, so that's a good characteristic to tell those apart. The other thing that if you're really having trouble, if you really want to get down into bury yourself in the details, here on this band right here with these two orange spots, there's a black dot in each of those two, which is lacking in the Vesta crescent. But the Vesta crescent is the one that's going to have the most distinctive crescent pattern here along the trailing edge of the hind wing. And then when the wings are folded, fairly easy to tell apart simply because, again, this creamy yellowish color that you have on the underside of the hind wing. This one is very drab with browns and kind of grayish whites. Now, this is one example where that little cell right there, that little white crescent, is lacking on that butterfly, so that can help stand out. But this pattern by itself is really what's going to separate the two, so it's not that hard to tell apart. All right, let's look at the crescent, or the pearl versus the Phaon crescent. And immediately you can see some similarities, but again, the big distinct difference is that right there. This is whitish, pale yellow. This is yellowish orange, so it's very distinctive, and shouldn't be able to confuse those two just based on that characteristic alone. But then also you can look at the crescents again down here on the marginal band. Again, only a few on the pearl. These go along and extend here all the way through the hind wing. And notice they're white, and we're going to see the difference when we look at the Phaon versus the Vesta here in a little bit in terms of color difference there. But this pattern up here on the Phaon is going to separate that from the pearl crescent pretty easily. Again, here are the wings folded. You can see this has a pattern that's similar in color to this guy in the summer season, but in the winter it's quite different. But again, you're going to notice this striking pattern of orange, yellow, and black on the forewing. This one doesn't have much pattern there. We can't see much, but clearly there's not a whole lot there by comparison. So you shouldn't be able to confuse those two when the wings are folded at all. Again, notice the difference in pattern. Okay. Now let's look at the pearl crescent and compare it to the Alata. Again, the pearl is going to be larger than the Alata crescent. The big thing to notice here is you've got the black dots right here. You have no dots here at all in any of the cells. And the same thing applies on the hind wing as well. No black spots in any of the orange cells on the Alata. So again, very, very easy to tell them apart when the wings are open. Or at least I hope that pretty clear. And again, very distinctive when their wings are folded. Very different pattern here versus that. So there's no doubt. You know, the pearl crescent versus the Alata, they're each are no doubters when you see them with the wings folded. Now we'll take a look at finally the pearl crescent, comparing it to the silvery checker spot. Again, we're going to have the spots, the black spots have light colored centers. Pearl crescent lacks that completely. You'll also notice that these cells right here have black. There's no cells right in here, and any of the orange ones lack black as well. So again, distinctly different. This one happens to be a bigger butterfly, but if you just got a quick glancing look at these two butterflies, it'd be easy to not know which one you had. So that's why when you're looking at these little tiny butterflies, you really have to study what's going on there. And that's why binoculars come in so handy, I think, with these surveys, is so that when they do land, you can get a good close look. Some people use cell phones, some people don't have binoculars or cell phones and try to identify them. And when it comes to these guys, it really does help to have some magnification some way, somewhere where you can get a look at from a little bit away, or take pictures so you can compare them different separately.
Hey, Craig,
And again, with the wing,
can we go back
yep,
to that previous slide real quick?
yeah.
Julie made a comment that the Swift guide doesn't show those pale spots in the dots inside the
Oh,
black
in the
dots.
silvery crescent.
Yeah,
Well,
so
I've got that book right here. Let me just look and see what she's talking about. Well, trust me, the silvery checker spot, that's the characteristic that I have used for my entire career to separate those two. Um, and let's see if I can find the silvery here pretty quick.
she said they're just tiny spots, not missing. They're just
Oh, they're smaller.
yeah.
Yeah, and the thing you have to keep in mind with all of these butterflies is there is a lot of variation. So one photograph that I'm showing you can look different from another photograph, for example, and it just is what it is, and you're going to get that natural variation that creates confusion. Um, and so what I'm trying to give you is just the most reliable characteristics. Of course, you'd think, hey, we got thunder. You think I'd be able to find it? Let's see here. So why would I be able to do that? That would be kind of silly to find it that easily. I can find every other one I'm talking about. There's the, oh, here's the chair. Yeah, here's the silvery. Well, if you look on page 198, at least of my version of the Swift guide, they do have a red arrow pointing to one. There's a pale spot centered on a black spot, and they just show it on one cell. So that's an example of that. But again, when you see these guys, oftentimes, at least in our area, a lot of them have the more distinct pattern. And I don't know where this photograph was taken. That's the other thing. There's going to be um, variation geographically on some of these butterflies. So that's another thing you have to worry about. Um, so what I can tell you in this area, if you see a butterfly that looks like this, and you even see one of those black spots with a little bit of light color in it, you've got a silvery checker spot. So so it could be every one, or it could be just one, as this one photograph in the book shows. Um, so I would tell you that that characteristic, whether it's 6 cells or one cell, is going to distinguish that from everything. Hopefully that helps break up that confusion a little bit.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out, though, because
Thanks, Craig.
again, you bet the variation of these butterflies, they just can be dramatically different. Two butterflies sitting side by side, the same species, which makes their identifications challenging. And all I will tell you is, by comparison, if we were to look at the fritillaries in the Rocky Mountains, good luck identifying them. And that's with good pictures. So they can be a real drag to try to figure out. All right. Let's see here. We're going to move on. Now we're going to take a look and compare the Vesta crescent with the remainders. We've already looked at the Vesta and the Pearl. So here's the Vesta versus the Phaon. And these are the two, if you're going to confuse one, these two could be confused a little bit because, again, on occasion, you'll see a little bit of paler color in that particular band right there. But again, if you look at these two, there's really no comparison. But a lot of times you only have one or the other. So you really have to study that and really give a good hard look to that. The other thing, if you look at the crescents down here along the leading edge, these do tend to be a little bit more orange yellow, whereas these tend to be a little whiter, more like the band right here is a pale, very pale white or very pale yellow. So those two characteristics right there, if you're looking at them, but again, if they're not side by side, it adds a little bit of a challenge to identify. But definitely you want to, that's what you're looking for to compare the two. And I know in our surveys, there have been times where we went, is that a Vesta or a Phaon? So it is, can be a little bit challenging. And I've done so many things. I've looked at all of these patches in here and these patches in here to see if I could find consistent differences, and you just can't. Or down in here and down in here to see if there's differences, and there's just so much overlap that you have to go with a few characteristics you can to help you identify them. Again, there's that crescent difference right there between the two. Then when the wings are folded, this is the winter form right here, but you can see again, this pattern here is fairly drab by comparison to this sharply patterned Phaon crescent on the underside. So shouldn't be too much confusion identifying those two. And if we look at the Vesta crescent and the Alata crescent, holy cow. And these guys sometimes are flying side by side out there when they're out all together. It would be easy to confuse these two. This one's again a little bit smaller, but again, if we go with characteristics, these black dots in these orange cells are lacking in the Alata and are in the Vesta. So that characteristic alone will separate the Alata from the Vesta or any of the other crescents that I've been showing you. So that alone should tell you what you've got. You'll notice that this band right here, again, has some yellowish white in it, as does this picture here, again, a little bit. So somebody might go, well, are we sure it's not a Phaon? Well, again, no black spots, and this is not that distinctive. So again, should be a fairly easy way to tell them apart. Wings folded, there's no comparison. I mean, the comparison is obvious. A very distinct, beautiful pattern on the Alata and not so much on the Vesta. So easy to tell apart, I think. Then if we compare the Vesta with the silvery checker spot, a few characteristics here. Again, look for those spots, whether it's one or all of them. Look for those, and that is fairly distinctive. You don't have any sign of that on the Vesta, of course. And then the crescents here are a little bit more distinctive here on the marginal band versus this one, or the submarginal band versus this one here. So that can help you between the Vesta and the silvery. Of the two, the silvery is larger than the Vesta crescent, so something to keep in mind. And then when we look at the wings, the tips of the wings, as I mentioned with the pearl, the silvery has a little bit more black, so it's just not as quite as patterned as you see on the Vesta crescent. It's more of a wash there with more orange spots and a little bit of white in there. So that can help you with the identification if you need that help. And then here we've got the hind wing. Again, you can see the spots down here, even on the underside of the wing, and those clear spots and the black circles. That is lacking completely here. The pattern here is fairly distinct, has a distinctive pattern here, has a little kidney bean-like thing right there, which this one lacks. And then on the forewing, again, a very distinctive black line here, black up in here, which doesn't really show up very well here. All right, so now let's take a look at the Phaon crescent and compare it to the couple that are left here. We're working our way through these pretty quickly. The Phaon, again, you can't mistake them because of that white crescent or white band there. And then again, this one lacks any black circles in this orange cells. Those two characteristics alone will tell these apart. Again, Alata is smaller, weaker flying versus the Phaon crescent. And the Phaon is much more common at Guadalupe than anywhere else. Wings folded a little, again, pretty contrasty. You really can't mistake these two because of this bold pattern of the Alata. Now, finally, we've got the Phaon crescent. We're going to compare it to the silvery checker spot. And again, here's the differences here. They're pretty obvious. The differences here, pretty obvious. I've been kind of beating this into your head. So again, the Phaon, the white crescent right here, you're going to see that's lacking here. This is all orange. This is a bigger butterfly. And again, the spot pattern here is different. Wings folded, this is where you get a little bit more similarity with the Phaon crescent and the winter plumage, or winter pattern anyway. But again, you can look and see the difference in the hind wing patterns on the underside. And you can also see, again, the spots here that are lacking on the Phaon crescent. hopefully you don't have to make too many of those comparisons. But again, you can see that these are a little bit alike, different. So then we have the Alata with the silvery. We got the smallest butter of the crescents and checker spots with the largest, the silvery. Again, fairly distinctive. No spots here, with some of them having the lighter colored centers, and these completely lacking. Again, more pattern in the forewing tip of the Alata versus mostly black on the silvery checker spot. And again, the size difference there is so different. This guy being 1.75 inches and this guy being less than an inch, about 7/8 of an inch. So significant difference in size there on these two. And then here's the underwing, just so you can see them. This one has more of a distinct pattern here, but this one is so distinct that, again, there should be no confusion between those. All right, so now we're going to pull this back up, and I promise we're going to move into some other butterflies after this. We're going to start putting names on these. Hopefully by now you've got them all, so I'm not going to try to ask you because it'll just be too hard to figure out. But number 1 is the pearl crescent. Again, number 2, the silvery checker spot. 3 was the Phaon crescent. 4 is the Vesta crescent. Oh, 5 we haven't talked about yet. So I'm going to give you a hint right here what this one is. This is the Fiona checker spot, and we haven't got to that one yet, but we will be. And then we have the Alata over here. And surprisingly enough, as different as these two look, when their wings are folded together, they're quite similar, as you're going to find out in a moment. But here's a distinctive orange and black and yellow butterfly. But the rows on all of these are so distinctly patterned that when you start looking at these and comparing all of them, really isn't mistaking a Fiona from any of these others. The Fiona is primarily South and West Texas. I find them more in West Texas than anywhere, but we do occasionally get them around here. So we do want to look at that one when we get a chance. So you had enough? Good. You haven't. All right, we're going to continue, whether you have or not. So now we're going to go look at a few last of these that are more distinct and easier to identify just on their own. We don't have to do straight by comparisons for any of these, really. The Texan crescent very rarely has its wings folded, so I'm not going to focus too much attention there, but I wanted to expose you to it. But the Texan crescent has this distinct reddish pattern in the interior part of both the forewing and the hind wing from above. It has this beautiful white spotted pattern that goes through the hind wing right through here. Very distinctive butterfly. When it's out, it can be fairly common. Never super abundant wherever I've done my surveys. It does feed a lot on frog fruit, so this is a good one to watch for in the frog fruit area, where you have frog fruit blooming in the summertime. But that pattern right there, and I've seen it in wide open sunny spots. I've seen it in the woods, so it can be in a variety of habitats. That reddish orange patch you have on each wing is very distinctive of the Texan crescent. Then we have the bordered patch, another really strikingly beautiful butterfly. The pattern here, this big orange bar that goes through the forewing and the hind wing, can be very variable. So, but it's so obvious when you look at it like this that it may be thicker orange or it may be narrower. But generally, this is a pretty good general characteristic of this particular butterfly. The other thing, when the wings are folded, very distinct. You can see that instead of orange, only the edges of it are orange, this row, this band, that it's more of a creamy, whitish yellow color there, but very distinct pattern there. Very beautiful butterfly. And fairly common. They lay their eggs in huge bunches. On a lot of different composite family members, from Zexmenia to Cowpendaisy. So they can be around when they're around. If a lot of them survive, there can be a lot of them in a big flush of them. So they are absolutely gorgeous butterfly. And then I'll throw this one in just because occasionally it shows up in the San Antonio area, all the way up into Bernie. I've seen it out in Medina during a butterfly count one time out there. In fact, that's where this one was photographed, at the hamburger spot there in Medina. Great place to get hamburger. after a good butterfly survey. So this is fairly distinctive. The crimson patch, there's another one that's similar to that. I don't know if you notice this, but do you see the little friendly ghost right here? Two little eyeballs and a mouth. He's smiling. Here's another one over here. But instead of a white sheet, it's an orange sheet. So fairly distinctive, the crimson patch. But again, most of these, when they're seen, are going to be down in the valley in very far South Texas. But keep an eye open for these because when they do show up, they're quite stunning butterfly. And I mentioned the Thiona checker spot before. Again, not very common in our immediate area. I've seen it as far out as Seminole Canyon, and then out farther west from that. But very striking pattern, very clean pattern of rows of orange and paler orange, yellow that are very distinctive. And when the wings are folded, just an absolutely beautiful pattern here. In some ways, I think this pattern is even more beautiful than this one. This one does tend to fold when it rests. A lot of times you'll have its wings folded a lot more. This was taken from a distance. That's why the picture's so blurry, which I apologize for. But a very distinctive, not very common butterfly that we have out here. But we've had it on iNaturalist. It's been documented 3 times in the iNaturalist for Guadalupe River State Park, so it can occur in our area. Here's, by the way, the comparison of the wings. Not a great comparison, but you can see how striking the pattern is. Again, this one has, these look more like teeth, like shark's teeth, I guess you could say. Along here, these are a lot less deep, but much more narrower rows of these. Again, the size difference here is significant as well, so just keep that in mind. And just so we have this comparison, the border patch versus the Thiona, shouldn't be that hard to tell apart because this is a big old orange bar, and this is a series of different bar colors that go along the wings here. When the wings are folded, again, this is a very distinct, almost creamy white with no black lines surrounding these cells, where it does have that here. So you shouldn't confuse the two. And of the two, the bordered patch is going to be far more common of all the butterflies. All right, we are through with all the patches and the crescents and the checker spots. I know that was a lot to cover in a short period of time, but hopefully that will help you kind of start to tease them apart, and with the knowledge that there's a lot of variation in these butterflies. So, as was pointed out earlier. All right, so now we're going to look at some of the brushfoots, the more typical brushfoots. These are going to be kind of a hodgepodge of butterflies that all have that characteristic of the 2 front legs being reduced in size. A lot of them will fly in our area, will fly throughout the entire year. We'll cover several of them tonight. We're going to go all the way up to the common buckeye, and then we'll stop tonight. So we've only got, I think there's 11 more slides, so we'll get through these fairly quickly. And they're pretty distinct butterflies, so there's not a ton of comparison that has to be done. That said, let's get started with the question mark. Question mark, these are one of the angle wings. You can see their wings look like, and this has been worn. This is an older one, but it looks like somebody took scissors and just cut out kind of a raggedy pattern along the edge of the trailing edge of the forewing and the hind wing. You can really see it here all the way across. Notice this is the winter form versus the spring summer form. And this one is always so beautiful when you first see them because of this bluish gray outline of the wings. And it's just a striking butterfly. And this one is more kind of a drab orange pattern that you see here. You will notice that this one has spots on the forewing, black spots on the forewing. That'll be important in case you ever run across a goatweed leaf wing that has its wings open, which doesn't happen very often, which will have more of a solid orange pattern without all these spots. And we'll compare that later. But it gets its name question mark because of these 2 spots right here. Here's the question part, and here's a little dot. So that's supposed to be a question mark. We don't have commas in our area immediately. I'm sure somebody will argue with me, but we don't. They are farther north in Texas and farther east in Texas, where they become a lot more common. But they would lack that little tiny silver spot right there. They would simply just have this right here, and they're a little bit smaller butterfly as well. and they don't generally have this beautiful color in the winter form of this guy. This is a butterfly that I always think should be more common, and we get it on our surveys once in a while, but it's never very abundant. So it does lay its eggs on a lot of different kinds of trees and hackberries and nettles. So it's a quite ubiquitous in terms of the variety of things it'll lay its eggs on. Um, but it just is what it is. And you can see here, again, we pointed out the pattern here is quite strikingly different. This was taken in early March. This was taken in late fall. Now, just so that you know, here's the question mark versus the goatweed leafwing. We'll talk more about the leafwing next time, but I wanted to put this up here just to get it in your head. First thing you'll notice is that this comes up and is kind of squared off, even though it's pointed, more of a squared off pattern here. With the goatweed, it comes up to a very sharp scallop point and then comes all the way down into another tail right here. This one had a tail, it's just most of it's been worn off. You'll also notice that while the goatweed does have some little funny patterns, can have, not always, can have these little marks here, none of them look like this. So this, again, with these two butterflies with their wings folded, the tip of the wings and those silver spots, the silver pattern right here will be very distinguishable and tell them apart quite easily. Another butterfly that we don't see very often, I have seen it once or twice at Guadalupe, never got a picture of it. But it can exist around here. This is probably one of our longest, if not longest living butterflies we have. This is the morning cloak, striking butterfly, but just not seen very often. Generally, there's a generation per year. What happens is they will come out they overwinter as adults. And I have seen in Wisconsin in the middle of winter on a warm day in January, these guys are hiding under bark. The bark warms up. They come out and fly around for a while when there's snow covering the ground. And then they go back, hopefully go back and go back into hibernation. But they'll come out in the springtime. They'll feed for a while. They will, and then they'll estivate. They'll go back into, or no, they'll mate. They come out, they mate. The larvae are raised up on a variety of different trees. And then those adults, when they emerge in July, sometime in July area, they may be active for a short while. And then when it gets too hot, they'll go and estivate, which means they just go find a place to sleep it off for a while. And then in the late fall, they'll reemerge and they will feed to be able to fatten up so that they can go into true hibernation and stay for the rest of the winter until springtime. And of course, we don't call hibernation in butterflies hibernation like we do in mammals, but a similar pattern where they become inactive as adults. But you can see they've kind of a camouflage sort of color, except for a striking yellowish white pattern on the edge of the wings. This is the top, of course, the folded wings. They have a very distinct flight. They have a few strong wing beats and then a glide. It's very discernible. When you see one, you can actually tell what it is. But we don't see them very often. So this is a good one to keep your eyes open for. It has a huge distribution across the United States, across North America. But it is a spotty butterfly for us in our survey efforts. One of the most common butterflies we have and most distinctive when the wings are open is the red admiral. This is a butterfly that has some interesting behaviors we'll talk about. But the distinctive thing there is these reddish orange epaulet that you have on each of the forewings. And you have the orange trailing edge of there, and you've got some white spots in the forewing here. When the wings are folded, very different looking, almost well camouflaged, but you can kind of see this hint of blue here, and then this hint of pinkish color here that helps you identify it. But very distinctive. It comes out, it feeds mostly on sap. So in the springtime, oftentimes we'll look for trees that have got leaking sap, and they'll be there nectaring on that sap. And they also are very, very strong, fast flyers. And you can find them in a variety of habitats. They will feed on flowers. They'll come zooming by you and not give you 5 seconds. But if you're out in the woods, especially, and you're walking down a trail, and all of a sudden a butterfly flies right at your face, it's probably a red admiral. They are very defensive of their little sunspots in the woods. And always like to say I have been attacked multiple times by a red admiral, but have failed to have sustain any injuries so far. Um, but it is pretty amazing that they will attack humans. They'll attack deer. I've had them fly at my pickup truck when I was at the park years ago. But a really stunning butterfly, I think. Um, and a good name for it, red admiral with those epaulets. Then we have a couple of ladies that we have in the area. This is the American lady. Again, another butterfly, amazingly enough, that some people, especially new people, might think is a monarch because it has the orange and the black. So there's a little education that has to go on with that. The American lady overwinters as an adult, so it's an early emerging butterfly here in South Texas. It is distinct on its hind wing, but well, wait, let me go back by two things. First of all, I'm going to say second of all, there's these two great big eye spots on the underside of the hind wing, very distinctive. And if there's any confusion, then what I always taught my volunteers was look for that white spot right there in the center of that orange field. So you can see it there, you can see it here, and you can see it here with the wings open if you look for it. But it can be very faint sometimes. But I always look, if I can't see the wings folded, I'm always going to look for that white spot on the either of the forewings to tell me that this is in fact an American lady. So keep that in mind. That's the easiest way to tell these guys. They fly most of the year in our area. They always seem to emerge earlier than the painted ladies, which is this guy right here, this butterfly right here, very beautiful. Similar in pattern. We're going to look at comparison pictures, but notice instead of two large cells, which by the way, I'm giving Susan Bogle credit for this, and she probably gives credit to somebody else. But the two big spots, American, US, so that kind of thing. This one has four spots, right? Smaller spots here that aren't quite as distinctive. Also, you'll notice it lacks the little white spot on the forewings. So, and that's pretty consistently accurate if you can't see the wings with the wings folded. Again, this actually has a almost worldwide distribution, makes massive migrations from Africa to Europe. It probably makes a longer migration than monarch butterflies, but it doesn't get any credit because it's not as viewed big and bold and it has not been studied as much. But there are times when even here in the United States, where I grew up in Iowa, we didn't have painted ladies until later in the summer because they couldn't survive the winter up there. So they would emigrate or migrate, whatever you want to call it, north over the course of the summer and then populate that area. And then in the winter, they would die back. And then we'd have to wait until later in the summer of the next year to see them again. So here's a comparison of these two with the wings open. Again, fairly similar. So you got to be a little bit careful here when you're looking at these. There's the spot on the American, lacking on the painted. The other thing to notice here is that I've noticed generally, if you can't see this for some reason, you look at these spots here and here, these spots don't have any white centers. These kind of have kind of a bluish white, silvery spots in the center of the black spots on that wing. So keep that in mind as you're going along as well. Here are the comparison with the wings folded again, the four, 5 cells versus the two large cells right here. And again, this white spot in the American lady and lacking in the painted. So I should have beaten that into you by now. So hopefully we can move on to another species. We're going to move on to our last species for the night. Apologize for running a little past an hour tonight. That's going to be the common buckeye. It is a common butterfly. The big eye spots are so striking, you really can't confuse this butterfly with anything else we have around here. And it spends a lot of the time laying on the ground with its wings open, so it's easy to identify. It is a strong flyer when it flies, but then if you watch it, it doesn't often go super long distances, so it'll land again on the ground. More seldomly will you see it with the wings folded, but again, there's one of the great big eye spots so that you can see that is fairly distinctive right there. So something to keep in mind. But this is a beautiful butterfly, flies most of the year. In the wintertime, they can be very tiny. It can be almost half the size of the normal size you see in the summertime. So don't be surprised by this. A different species. It's just a different nutritional situation that probably went through to get to that itty bitty size in the wintertime. But you can see this. This is one of our few butterflies we'll see 12 months out of the year. I do want to talk very briefly. They have taken this butterfly and separated it over the last 10 to 15 years into some different species. Um, and so three of those are in Texas that have been recognized, certainly by iNaturalist. So here's our typical one, and you'll notice this cream color goes all the way or almost all the way, both sides of this big eye spot right here. When you get to the West Texas, out in from Fort Davis south into Big Bend, you have what's called the dark buckeye. And you'll notice that it's just overall much darker, kind of a sooty gray color. And that band right here that is very light and comes kind of wraps around there is very much much harder to see. And it really doesn't wrap around very much there. And you also notice that the little epaulets here are more red than they are orange. I did borrow this from my natural. This is the only photograph in here that wasn't mine. Haven't seen that one yet out there. But on the Gulf Coast last summer, I found this guy. I thought, well, it's a buckeye, but it sure looks different. And it turns out it's a fairly new species called the twin tip buckeye, and it's called twin tip because it feeds on a plant that is has the name twin tip, so that's where it gets its name. Um, it's called the gray woolly twin tip, and it's only found along our Gulf Coast. I got this. I photographed this at the state park just north of Corpus Christi, and feeding on this little purple flower here. Notice here, and I didn't get a great picture of the wings open. It just wouldn't do it. The wings were folded all the time. But you'll notice that this pattern right here, if you compare it to here, is much oranger, and that a little just generally darker. So that is one of the distinguishing marks here. They also separated this into a separate species because the only thing this particular species feeds on is that gray woolly twin tip that's only found along the Gulf Coast of Texas and Mexico. So that's how it got separated into a separate species. So if you're down there around Corpus, watch for those. You might be surprised, or if you're out in West Texas, look for this. This is a stunning looking butterfly. So watch out for those as well. All right. That is all I'm going to cover tonight. I think we've talked enough. I certainly have talked enough. Hopefully, this has been helpful for you. This is one of those, it's probably best to go and watch it another time just to kind of separate. And I would always encourage you to get out your field guide and go along with the field guide with the photographs, and then read the notes in the different species accounts. Again, I use Kaufman, but the Swift guide is an excellent guide as well. So use that if you can, have it available as well. I should tell you that our next upcoming survey at the Guadalupe River State Park will be Friday, May 1st. We'll begin at 11 a.m. because presumably it'll be fairly warm by then. And then the second one for the month of May will be Saturday, the 16th, again at 11 a.m. We're going to be shifting now as we get towards summer to 11 a.m. surveys for the rest of the spring and summer into the fall. So just so that you're aware of that. Our next online training or review will be Monday, May 4th, and that'll be part 2 of the Brushfoots. And then I'll probably introduce the skippers a little bit, depending on how long that presentation takes to put together. And then the first Monday evening in June, we'll cover the skippers, and then we'll wrap all of this up. So I hope this is, again, I hope this is valuable to you all. It has been valuable to me to just put it together and kind of re-examine the butterflies that I've been looking at for a long time. And every once in a while, it does you some good to review them, because sometimes we start making assumptions about, especially the smaller butterflies, without really examining. So I've had to make sure that for myself, and try to pass it on to all the volunteers that I work with, fellow volunteers, I should say, at this point, that we need to make sure we slow down and really look at it and get confirmations on those tiny butterflies. So I will stop sharing right now. Sorry we ran a little bit long, but I kind of forewarned you that maybe we would on this one. So I don't know if there's any questions or anything.
Uh, I don't see any in the chat, just lots of thank you as always.
Okay, okay,
Excellent presentation. I think that what we try to do is take those questions as we go, just so it's easier to address them on the
perfect,
spot.
perfect.
But yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop those in the chat or pop on and ask your question. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.